the cause of the difficulties that all of these people were facing could all be pinpointed on the hostile environment policies. When politicians announced that they wanted to create a very hostile environment for illegal immigrants, they made a really fundamental miscalculation, because they assumed that the Home Office would be good at telling the difference between people who were in the UK legally and people who weren't. And it turned out that the Home Office was not very good at making that really crucial distinction. This is Paulette Wilson, who was 61 when that picture was taken. She was somebody who was born in Jamaica. She travelled to Britain entirely legally in 1968, when she was 10, to live with her grandparents in Telford. She went to primary school in Britain, to a secondary school here. She had a daughter, a granddaughter. She spent decades paying taxes. She worked as a cook. She spent some time working as a chef in the House of Commons canteen, serving food to the politicians who'd go on later to develop the hostile environment policies. And from 2015 onwards, she began to receive a series of really frightening letters from the Home Office telling her that she was a person with no leave to remain in the United Kingdom. She was told that if she was unable to prove that she'd entered the UK legally in 1968, then she was liable for deportation. She had no idea how to prove that she came here lawfully half a century earlier. Her many, many attempts to explain to the Home Office that she was here legally didn't work. And so this entirely law-abiding woman was arrested twice and then detained for a week in an immigration detention centre, and then driven to Heathrow, where she was booked on a flight back to Jamaica, a country that she'd left 50 years earlier and hadn't returned to since. Paulette's difficulties arrived on my desk at The Guardian in the form of an email from the Wolverhampton Refugee and Migrant Centre, which had been trying to help her to untangle her situation for a couple of years before she was taken to Heathrow. At the last minute, probably about 12 hours before her flight was due to take off, the charity, along with her MP, managed to get a stay of the deportation. She was allowed to go home, but there was a deportation order or removal order still hanging over her. So they contacted me at The Guardian. I'd been to Wolverhampton before. I'd met this charity when I was reporting on something completely different. And I agreed to go and meet her. And I went and interviewed her towards the end of 2017 and spent several hours with her trying to understand why the Home Office had made what seemed like a really terrible mistake. We published a story about her in The Guardian, and there was no real response from the government or from the Home Office, except that they gave the advice that she needed to get a good immigration lawyer, which wasn't very helpful advice, because by that point she wasn't able to work and she had had her benefits stopped, so she didn't have money for a lawyer, and changes to legal aid had meant that immigration law, legal aid didn't cover immigration cases, most of them. So there wasn't very much response from the Home Office or from the government, but we had huge response from readers, both from people who were really outraged by the kind of draconian way that she'd been treated, but also from a number of people who, it turned out, were experiencing very similar difficulties. And within hours of publication of that piece, I was contacted by the son of Anthony Bryan, who also had been in this country since he was 9. He'd come here, again, entirely legally as a child to live with his parents who were working here, hadn't left Britain for 50 years, and who, again, had been paying taxes, had been working until he had received a letter as he approached retirement telling him he was in the country illegally. He lost his job. He was twice arrested. He'd spent 5 weeks in immigration detention by the time I saw him, and he'd also been booked on a flight back to Jamaica. And I think he'd had to gather together about £4,000 borrowing money to get a lawyer to issue a stay of that removal notice. So again, he was still in the UK, but with a removal notice hanging over him. I went to interview him at his house and went through dozens of documents that he and his partner had gathered, trying to prove to the Home Office that he was here legally, but which hadn't been adequate. And he was kind of not as surprised by the way that the Home Office had treated him as I was when I spoke to him. And when I asked him why he was kind of more world weary about it, he said it was because he knew a lot of people from his childhood who'd also come from the Caribbean as children, who were facing similarly difficult problems with the Home Office. They hadn't been arrested, but they were also getting phone calls and letters saying that they were not here legally. This was something that took quite a long time to report on within The Guardian, to get to the point that the government acknowledged that there was anything happening that was in any way problematic. And to begin with, it was a really difficult thing to report on because a lot of the people who were caught up in this issue didn't want to speak about it, because you wouldn't understandably be incredibly enthusiastic about the idea of giving an interview and having your name in the paper and a photograph saying that you have been classified as an illegal immigrant. But gradually, small charities around the country were in touch with other people who had had similarly aggressive letters telling them that they were here illegally and telling them that they were liable for removal. Removal is the kind of politer term for deportation. Amongst the people who I spoke to in the first kind of months of reporting was Renford McIntyre, and I really don't like this photograph because it shows Renford at a time of his life when things are really profoundly going wrong for him. He was 64 then. He's doing much better now than he was then. He'd arrived in the UK entirely legally at the age of 14, also from Jamaica. He had, about 6 months before this picture, lost his job as a driver for the NHS. As a result of losing his job, having been told by the Home Office that he didn't have the right to be in the UK legally, despite, I think, 46 years of having been here. He'd lost his job. As a result of losing his job, he'd got into debt, he'd lost his property, and he was sleeping in an abandoned industrial unit. So, there was no heating, no water, no plumbing. And I suppose I show it because it's hard to exaggerate how badly people were affected by this problem, because the state of being classified as being an illegal immigrant, once hostile environment policies had been introduced, have really, really catastrophic consequences. This is the view from my desk at The Guardian. That's not my desk, it's the desk of the person next to me, my desk is much tidier, but I show it because it sort of symbolises a really messy, complicated, non-linear way of daily reporting life. So I think often when you see films about the inside of newsrooms, it looks much more kind of organised and as if you have a kind of clear vision and thread of what you're doing from one day to the next. But actually doing this reporting was very messy because it wasn't at all clear initially that the problems that people were facing were the direct result of the hostile environment. And it only became kind of clear over months of interviewing one person after another. And it only gradually became clear that the cause of the difficulties that all of these people were facing could all be kind of pinpointed on the hostile environment policies. And it's almost impossible to overstate how badly they were affected. So amongst these people are ambulance drivers, special needs teachers, former soldiers, Meals on Wheels volunteers. Some were sacked from their jobs, others were evicted from their homes or told that they weren't eligible for the life-saving cancer treatment that they needed.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.